Imagine you're out one day doing some urban exploring, checking out some old abandoned buildings you always wanted to explore. Of course, you have your old camera with you, just in case. When you find something a little out of the ordinary, in one of the abandoned buildings on a seemingly innocuous spot on the wall, you notice objects and even parts of your body can seem to clip right through into who knows where when you get a little too excited, sticking first your fingers and then part of your arm through the hole before you find yourself no clipping right into the Backrooms. A Journey Through the Backrooms, tape 1 and 2, is a somewhat recent series, with tape 2 being released roughly 2 months ago. It's probably my favorite Backroom series overall, and maybe recency bias is playing, a pretty big part in that. Either way, only time will tell, and as this being a series I love, I would like to give it the same treatment I did recently with the Glendale Archive series, and do a bit of a deep dive on what we have so far.
This is the place. I'll get it on film, so yeah, I will have to believe me. Somewhere on this wall. Wait a sec. Okay. See?
We begin seeing our unnamed protagonist, I will call Glenn for simplicity's sake, walking through what appears to be an old apartment complex of some sort. There doesn't seem to be any sign of any current residents. Glenn hops a fence, making his way to a much more dilapidated looking building, proclaiming, "This is the place." Making his way inside, he proceeds to prod around a wall with a stick he found until he finds what he was looking for. A spot on the wall where the stick passes right through. Getting a little overexcited, he proceeds to test it further, sticking his fingers, slowly inching in until he gets most of his arm in there, before it seemingly sucks him straight through. Glenn makes his way to his feet as the title flashes on screen, before he steps out into a wide corridor with many different walls and openings seemingly placed at random. The Backrooms. He calls out a few times, hoping to find some help. He starts off more reserved at first before, he starts shouting at full volume. And while a little panicked, he hasn't quite realized how bad his situation is yet. He continues lingering in a darker section for a few moments, maybe trying to calm himself. Glenn zooms in on one of the mini light fixtures, this being one of the few that is out, and at the apex of his zoom, it suddenly springs back to life, surprising him as he flails the camera a little bit in shock. It even kind of sounds like he laughs a little bit. Was that a coincidence, or is that the Backrooms already playing with Glenn? Continuing through some more of the familiar yellow hallways, I'm sure we'll see plenty of, Glenn finds a strange ledge in one of the darker section, lifting the camera above his head to scan over the ledge. We see nothing but a faint light before he continues down the passage, finding some narrow corridors.
It's narrow.
Glenn decides to investigate one of these thin corridors, coming to what looks like a strange human-like silhouette at first. And he quickly backs out, understandably so. But I think if we go back and look closely, to me it very clearly appears to just be a coat on a coat rack. But, being understandably nervous, Glenn retreated before studying it. Although you should keep the image of the coat rack in your head for later. No particular reason. Moving on, he clears his throat several times, maybe getting parched. Who knows how long it is between cuts. It's not long before he finds a small circular room with fancy wood paneling and a single window looking out at a single tree. Glenn admires the trees for a few moments before pointing the camera at the ceiling and doing a little twirl as he goes. Heading into yet another area filled with darkness, he finds a light switch, trying his luck. He is met with the sound of mechanical whirring of some kind, and two loud clangs before a single one of those fluorescent lights powers on, showing what looks like the terrain for a museum exhibit of some kind. Confused, he moves on, trying another light switch. This one a bit more odd, showing a room full of laundry lines, like just loaded with clothes. Continuing on, he finds a third and final switch. This one has the longest build-up and has that same mechanical whirring before revealing what I can only describe as like an amalgamation of like tree roots or branches. It definitely just feels like a bunch of tree roots got morphed into one and put in that sort of shape you see. Moving on, he finds a small bathroom, mentioning it feels cold. He also doesn't check the tap to see if that works, so maybe not so thirsty yet, although probably would have been smart to check either way, although it makes sense for him to miss that due to being anxious. Coming to a blocked off room, Glenn zooms through the partition towards a desk with some old looking equipment on it. From the distance, it's hard to see clearly, but I think it's radio equipment of some sort, perhaps to like communicate across the backrooms at some point. Glenn mumbles to himself as he passes more of the strange architecture of the backrooms. After some time and another cut, he arrives at a drop. Circling the railing, Glenn gets closer, lowering his camera, hoping to sort of get a better view of the room below. But it seems as if the old creaky railing gives a little bit, causing him to drop the camera. And through the dropped camera, we can see some of that downstairs area. And what we see is what appears to be a dark human silhouette facing towards the camera, but bent uncomfortably far backwards, with its hands straight in the air. Both the video and audio are very distorted, probably caused by whatever this entity is. It bends forward, turning and walking away as if it were in slow motion. The distortion seems to sort of fade with it as it exits the camera's view, and it happens to disappear right before Glenn drops down to retrieve the camera. So here we have our first sign of any type of entity, and although its appearance was pretty menacing, it didn't actually seem to act in a hostile manner yet. Maybe that will change, but maybe this entity isn't harmful. We'll see. Mentioning the drop wasn't so bad, Glenn continues on, doing very well keeping his calm so far. Almost going down another dark hallway, he changes his mind, choosing another one with a visible light at the end. He arrives at what looks like a very large conference room, chairs and tables randomly dotted around the room. Both the upper and bottom floors are also lined with doors similar to the one Glenn arrived from. Glenn zooms in on one door in particular, with the curtain pulled slightly to the side, almost like someone was peeking out. Maybe the entity from earlier is watching Glenn now, or nothing. Moving on, Glenn is shocked when the ceiling lights shut off, almost in like a weird pattern, and these overly bright lights turn on what appears to be a stage down below. Glenn drops below the railing, hiding and staying still, although it only takes a few moments for the lights to power back on as normal. Although I wonder, is the Backrooms doing this on purpose, or is it almost like a routine it has? I don't know, it's just that, and with the one light from earlier, it already feels like it's just using the lights to kind of mess with Glenn. Maybe get in his head. Glenn moves on, noticeably walking much faster. Nerves must be setting in at this point. Finds what looks like a restaurant or hotel kitchen of some sort. Making a joke to himself to lighten the mood, he notices a water fountain, desperately pressing the switch to no avail. This one is out of order. So at this point, it has obviously been long enough that thirst and hunger, must be a fear weighing on his mind. He seemed pretty thirsty there. So I just wonder if he's kicking himself about the water tap from before. He steps out on one. Looks like it might be like a patio, like for some outdoor restaurant or even like a ship deck. And leaning over a railing, we see this. So, I guess people in a certain age range who are playing video games in the early 2000s will recognize this as the PS2 a boot screen. I think it shows up for a little bit whenever you load a game, but it's whenever you don't have a disc in, it stays up while you have the menu. Why that is here in the Backrooms, I truly have no idea. Did Sony just decide, put this in the Backrooms and film it here instead of making it digitally? Or is it some weird art piece? Either way, Glenn is alerted when he hears a thud from behind him, turning to see nothing. Once again, maybe the entity from earlier following him now. Not too much happens for a bit after this. Glenn is faked out when he finds a door with light flooding through it. Can't imagine his disappointment when he opens it to be back in those familiar yellow hallways. After some more exploration, he comes across a glowing red exit sign. Finally.
What a weird place. Missing you. Am I even... What? I'm sure I was...
Seeing the literal light at the end of the tunnel, literally, it's a light at the end of a tunnel. I guess figurative tunnel, a hallway is a tunnel. Glenn moves toward freedom, only to slowly realize that no matter how much he walks, he isn't getting any closer. And through this, we can hear the panic slowly rising in his voice as he realizes what's happening. And he tries running faster and faster, starting to scream over and over again. Before after some time, he just has to give up exhausted. He sits against the wall, recounting the many different ways he tried, like going backwards and with his eyes closed. All no use. His voice starts to break as he talks about missing his family. And it sounds like he's on the edge of tears, and at a point he remarks maybe being able to hear birds. Is that a sign that he's actually that close to the exit, or is that his mental state starting to get into him? Is he just hearing the birds? It is at this point Glenn is struck with a sudden idea.
Sometimes hear birds. Huh. Wait.
Dropping the camera, Glenn points it towards the exit before leaving it behind, trying his luck once more, walking and then running towards the presumed exit. Unfortunately, this only shows how futile it is, as space itself seems to bend, the exit stretching ever further out of reach. Almost like the Backrooms is actively changing itself, trying to stop him from leaving. As if that wasn't enough, the camera seems to lift up off the ground as that familiar distortion returns. It seems the entity did follow him, and for some reason picked up his camera. Was it trying to help? Trying to mimic him? Or did it want something else altogether? That is unclear as tape 1 concludes. Well, damn, that was a great start to a Backroom series. I think the pacing was great. It really just sort of lets you like sit in it for a while and just sort of let you feel like you're stuck in the Backrooms. And one thing I haven't mentioned throughout this yet is just how real the character feels compared to like most other Backrooms. Not only does he have hands, feet, shoes, a shadow, he also has personality and acts separately of the camera as he sets it down on the ledge, drops it over the railing, and then even at the end, we see him use it almost as a way to either try and escape or just document what happens when he does. And the entity picks up the camera. Most important, obviously, being his having a personality, as I think his commentary helps make the video a lot. As he starts off pretty calm and keeps that, just dropping a little bit here and there before the end, when it's just pure panic and desperation before sadness and then resignation. It was also interesting that the entity we saw wasn't overly hostile. At no point to me did it do anything clearly intended to hurt Glenn. In fact, it seemed to actively move away from him. When he first was coming down the railing, before he could get there, it was out of there. And it seemed to only observe him through the distance, seemingly not do anything at the end either, other than just pick up the camera. Although we can't say anything definitively about it yet. Maybe we'll get some more clues to it in tape 2. We open with Glenn still sitting near the exit. He gets up, dejected, seemingly giving up and moving on. We return once again to the endless yellow hallways, passing a lamp and what seems to be an abstract art piece, and even coming to some chairs stacked poltergeist style. Moving on, he sees what looks like a large machine or instrument in the middle of a room full of a bunch of overhead lights, almost like a studio. Turning on the lights, he investigates further.
Where are the marbles?
At this point, he finds out it's some type of exotic instrument called a marble machine. Alas, the marbles are nowhere to be found. Letting himself relax for a bit, Glenn plays with the machine a bit before it abruptly and loudly falls apart, giving him and me a heart attack. And while this could obviously just be, super old and was touched for the very first time in a long while, so it fell apart, it could also still just be the Backrooms fucking with Glenn. This one, unlike the light switches, I think could much more go either way, but still, I think it's something to take note of. He makes his way out of the room, saying a very heartfelt sounding sorry as he goes. We begin to hear some very eerie, almost like discordant music, and as Glenn rounds a corner, we see what looks like, the sort of classic Backrooms entity in like every video. On closer inspection, this seems to be another abstract art piece of some sort. Moving on, the music actually starts to sound sort of nice here.
Hey! Who's there? Who are you? Answer me. How? Answer me, damn it.
Finding a door with a human silhouette, Glenn snaps back around the corner, hiding as he calls out to the figure, desperately hoping for but getting no answer. He bursts through the door, disappointingly seeing it's yet another art piece. This time, a bunch of stone statues of people in various walks of life walking towards a wall, seeming to descend into the earth as they get towards it. We see the statues continue rising back on the other side of the wall. The scenery changes slightly as Glenn finds a room with a large plush dog.
Look at those.
Noticing a light switch in the room illuminates the dog's eyes, he gets a good chuckle, turning it off and on again till the eyes burst. Glenn noticeably jumps, getting a close-up of the eyes before he leaves dejectedly. It's interesting to me how calm he is now at this point in the video. Almost like he has just fully resigned himself at this point. Or perhaps he's just too mentally exhausted to be panicked. Walking down the hallway, he zooms in on what is either a fluorescent light or like a fake skylight. It also sounds like he says "poor thing" while looking at a shape behind the glass. Maybe a dead bird or mouse. I really can't tell here. Glenn approaches a hallway with red and blue light at the end. Proceeding, we begin to hear some rather pleasant piano music. The hallway splits in two, each direction leading to a room bathed in a different light, one red, the other blue. He heads into the red room first, seeing the source of the light being multiple of those like Christmas string lights, all hanging from like a metal circle in the center of the room, flowing inward towards the ceiling. The music seems to like intensify as he steps into the room, and he sort of just takes a few moments to like soak it in. He even stares up at the lights from the center, sort of spinning, letting all the lights blur. He only stops when he gets dizzy. We see the blue room is pretty much identical in everything but color. Quickly heading through, we step into an area now filled with tile instead of carpet, and we hear some sort of siren blaring from somewhere. Finding the source, it appears to be some sort of siren/alarm with a red light attached to it, but for some reason there's also this, well, I don't really know what to call it. It's almost like an effigy or something used in a ritual. It appears to be made from tree branches and seems to float almost. It looks like there's a sort of head or face almost made in the center. It sort of looks like it has a beak or mouth and horns, almost like goat or devil horns. Not really sure if this is supposed to be something actually used in like black magic ritual, or once again, is this another odd art piece? This doesn't feel like an art piece, especially the way it almost seems to float. Equally as confused as I am, Glenn moves on, passing some potted plants before coming out into what looks like some sort of a lobby with some elevators. trying the elevator button, Glenn's finger appears to phase through it, almost like the wall from Tape 1's intro. After a bit, the elevator door opens. Peering inside, it is endless in both directions. Glenn steps back just in time as the elevator comes screeching down the shaft. Surely would have killed him had he not moved. And before we move on, one thing I didn't mention, after Glenn pressed the elevator button, some people may have noticed, he looks back towards the red light that was flashing that now seems to have stopped. You'll notice it continued flashing for a while after he left the room, only seeming to stop when he pressed that button. What that could mean, I'm not sure. Did it change more in the back room than it just dropping the elevator? And one other note, there has been no sign of the entity from last episode or any distortion yet. Glenn takes a few moments, breathing deeply as he collects himself before standing up and moving on, heading out some sort of automated gate, almost like a garage would have. Glenn appears to have made it outside. It is quickly made apparent he actually hasn't. Made obvious due to the bizarre placement and shape of the benches, as well as the buildings. Getting close to a closed gate, we hear what sounds like a very loud mechanical whirring, almost like a generator or something. The camera cuts and we find ourselves on a straight, narrow path through some trees. No sign of the buildings in sight, and what looks like a tower in the distance. Cutting to the end of the path, we see it is not a tower at all, but a full-on train sticking straight up out of the ground with the rails attached, almost like it rammed straight out of hell. Another unusual fixture. This seems pretty unlikely to be an art piece, but maybe. On the other side of the train, the path continues. This path leading to a small little tree, seemingly insignificant, until Glenn sees the apples hanging from its branches. He quickly begins to eat his fill, stopping to show us one up close. And it appears to have a small sticker on it like you would find at the store, despite it seeming to grow off of this tree. The apples somehow no clip out of reality onto this tree? I have no idea. Or were these just placed here? The camera cuts again and we see a pile of cores back in front of a door like you would find on the front of a house. Glenn politely knocks before entering. Stepping in, it seems by all appearances like a normal kitchen, albeit completely empty and with the oven door slightly open. Noticing the sink, he tries it, drinking desperately when it happens to work, laughing as he does. Well, at least now that's food and water sorted for him. So he's got something to be happy about, at least. Peering into the oven, we get something I can't quite explain. It's like a white shape flashes in the back of the oven, and we hear a high-pitched sound. Slowed down and going frame by frame, I can maybe see a face, but that's a stretch. So yeah, if anyone knows what this is about, please let me know. Moving on, he explores the rest of the home. It's still seeming relatively normal. He also finds a picture of a young boy in another room. In another room, he finds a TV. Trying it out, it has power, but only plays static, of course. We see Glenn's face in the screen as he stares at it up close for a while. Moving to a proper balcony, he sees the building he is in is connected to a few others, sort of encircling an area, almost like a courtyard. But much like the elevator shaft, there seems to be no top or bottom. As he goes back to the house, he starts commenting that he knows the house somehow, that it feels familiar. Very interesting comment. Maybe the Backrooms just, uses models that are used in actual houses and it's familiar that way. Or, maybe it's straight up changing itself to fit his memory and continue messing with him. Moving up the stairs, he finds a room with a bed right before a dark passage. He comments on it feeling familiar again before deciding to get some well-earned rest. During his sleep, we see the camera positioned directly above Glenn and watching him sleep, almost like it's being held. We also hear an odd scratching, almost breathing-like sound. and the side of the lens seems to be obscured. And while Glenn awakes without incident, he is unaware something was watching him sleep. Normally, I would have assumed shadow entity from tape 1, but there was no distortion, and with the entity that close, I feel like there would have been the distortion. So, another entity perhaps? Glenn makes the bed before setting out for the day, cutting right back to the yellow hallways again. He sees some mechanical setup behind some glass. The sound of water can be heard. What purpose this serves, if it does anything at all, is anyone's guess. Maybe it pumps water for this portions of the backrooms. After some more travel, the decor changes slightly again, and Glenn finds himself at a sheer drop, as the hallway seems to suddenly go straight down.
What? No way. What is this? What? How? Okay, that's dumb. Oh boy.
Glenn decides to test the hallway by dropping an apple he brought. Smart move, one, stockpiling the apples, and also thinking to use it to test the hallway like this. Another good example of the protagonist interacting with the world, and we hear him react with joy as he drops the apple and it promptly goes to what would be the new ground, safely landing. He then sets his camera over the edge, once again vocally reacting. He finally steps over himself, laughing out loud. And I know I already said it, but this segment is, once again, just a really good example of him just being a character, having his emotions, his commentary, him thinking to test the drop in this way, and then actually doing it. It's just satisfying to see. He has some more fun jumping back and forth, laughing as he goes. Finally leaving, we pass a sign saying, "Have you forgotten anything?" A very interesting question in Glenn's case. Maybe his fear, his panic? He seems to be getting quite comfortable. Or maybe the sign means nothing at all. Once again, moving back through the familiar yellow hallways, Glenn calls them comforting the sign. Seems like a potential sign of his, mental state starting to fall. The back room starting to get to him, perhaps. Either way, he moves on, finding another room. Most notably in here is a coat rack that is on an elevated platform and a mirror. If you remember, this coat rack looks identical to the one from tape 1 down the narrow corridor. Why, I have no idea. Could be normal Backrooms mumbo jumbo just repeating stuff, or a sign that it's actively moving things around in its effort to trap or confuse Glenn. Soon, Glenn heads over to the mirror. After some investigation, he notices he can pass through it. Not learning his lesson from the beginning of tape 1, he steps all the way through the mirror, turning back to face it. And while Glenn does not lower the camera, his reflection does. Glenn reacts in panic, stepping forward, but it's too late. The mirror shatters and falls off the wall, the fluorescent ceiling lights beginning to turn off one by one until he's left with one tiny little light. We can hear him there as he's whimpering, softly crying out right before that final light cuts, ending tape 2. Whoo, damn, what an ending. And this one was just a roller coaster of ups and downs, with him sort of finding fun stuff and interacting with it, juxtaposed with the creepy stuff and jump scares. And then that ending. Man, so Glenn's stepping through the mirror, so what was up with his reflection moving on its own? So the two guesses I have are that it's one, either the Backrooms again messing with Glenn, this time through the reflection in the mirror, or it could be like an entity on the other side of the mirror and Glenn just saw it as himself, and that it lowering the camera was it doing something right as it shatters the mirror, and that's what Glenn saw, perhaps. Obviously a total guess. We don't really have much to go on for that. I know it's for sure not the entity from tape 1, is we got no distortion at all throughout the entire video, and no other signs of it following/watching, which we got in tape 1 from the moment it appeared. So it's either the entity that watched him sleep, a whole new one, or the Backrooms itself. And, consequently, this traps Glenn in this more hostile seeming version of the Backrooms. Like, so far when it messes with him, it's just like quick little things to sort of like freak him out, make him jump, but not truly terrify him. The way the lights turned off here after he stepped through, it almost seemed purposeful to build his dread and then just completely drop it when it turns off all the way. Yeah, interesting also that there was no sign of the entity from tape 1. Never any distortion or sign of it following. Just makes me curious, why did it stop following after tape 1? Did it get what it wanted? And of course, the possible appearance of another entity being the one that watched Glenn sleep, and maybe being what shattered the mirror, or, that also possibly being another separate entity. All right, so tape 1 and 2. That's it for now. And we know there is a tape 3 planned. I believe the creator has said this was always planned to be a trilogy, but they also said tape 2 took a year to make, and that tape 3 should be similar. Also noting that they haven't started yet. So that means we got a year, plus minimum. And while I love the series and want more, I'm also very willing to wait. Mr. Leon Niasti has earned some rest, I think. And also props for the video. Yeah, overall, love the series. Probably my favorite Backrooms. Although, like I said earlier, I should probably wait before claiming that. Recency bias really gets me. And like I said, it just does multiple things perfectly that so many other series don't even think about. And now, for what's going on. The basics are pretty obvious. Glenn found a spot that he could no-clip into the Backrooms, and accidentally did so. He spends most of tape 1 exploring, and like I've noticed, or like I've said, the Backroom seems to mess with him. Lights going off right as he focuses on him, them going off in the other room to mess with him, amongst other things. That's also where we found the first entity and the Shadow Man. And while it did stalk Glenn after it first appeared, it never once did anything that seemed aggressive or hostile, like it meant harm. Like, you could say, yes, like the following and watching, oh, that's weird, well, why would he be doing that? But you would think if it was following/watching him to do harm, it would have done it by some point, but it disappeared at the end of tape 1. It picked up the camera doing who knows what, and then that was it. Also, from that ending and parts of tape 2, like I said, the Backrooms itself seems to directly respond and change, according to Glenn. The hallway stretching to stop him from leaving, the red light going off with the elevator button, and the house being familiar to him. Not to mention him conveniently finding food and drink when he needs it before starving or dying of dehydration. And yes, also at this point, the shadow entity is gone, seemingly replaced by another entity that watched Glenn sleep. I also think it might be the quote-unquote mirror entity, the thing Glenn saw through the mirror that I think also smashed it, trapping him. Either that, or it is the Backrooms. Either way, like I noted before, this one feels much more malicious to me, especially if it did shatter the mirror. But even just watching Glenn sleep from so close. So I think with everything, my best guess for what is going on without seeing tape free is this version of the Backrooms is somehow sentient, whether like fully or partially. And it seems like it likes to play with / torment people, as it almost seems to like prank Glenn throughout tape 1 and tape 2 for that matter. Like many jump scares and many minor things like the light tricks. But even the only dangerous seeming one with the elevator falling, I think was probably timed to not hit Glenn and just freak him the hell out. And also, of course, the entities being in play. But yeah, what I'm calling the Shadow Man is very obviously human-like, being just like a black human silhouette, basically. And as I've noted, seemingly non-hostile, never once attacking Glenn, or doing anything to hurt him at all, for that matter. A fun theory I thought of that definitely isn't true is that somehow the Shadow Man entity picking up the camera at the end, like, allowed Glenn to leave, and it's just sort of taken his place, mimicking him throughout tape 2. That's for sure not a thing that happened. I just thought of it and thought it was fun, so there you go. Yeah, my biggest question for it is what it wanted. Did it just want to mimic Glenn? Did it want to interact with him? Or was it hostile and it never got the chance to do anything? My guess is honestly that it's non-hostile and did want to interact with him, but didn't know how. Why it disappeared, though, I cannot answer. And yeah, as for the second one, we obviously know less about that, but it of course feels a lot more dangerous watching him sleep from up close. And it's also very hard to see anything but the parts of its body covering the lens, and just the angle it watched from makes it feel more inhuman than or more monstrous, I should say, than the Shadow Man. And yeah, I believe it is either that entity or perhaps the Backrooms itself that was the reflection that seemed to also shatter the mirror, trapping Glenn. So from there, it kind of splits for me whether or not it was the entity or it was just the Backrooms. Because if the Backrooms itself did it, then that automatically makes it feel a lot more malicious to me than just trolling Glenn. Like, now it feels like it's out for blood. And maybe perhaps the act earlier was just to get him to a point like this so he would let his guard down and step through the mirror. That way he would go to an area of the Backrooms where it has more power, perhaps, and can more openly hurt him. If it was the entity that broke the glass, then my theory from earlier remains that that version of the Backrooms isn't actually very hostile and just wants to play with and mess with you, but not necessarily hurt you. And this mirror world is like a completely different Backrooms that does want to hurt you. But yeah, what I think really splits depending on whether it was that entity or not. But for now, that's how it comes together for me. Until tape 3 comes out, that's all I have. Last minute additions here. Something I think that strengthens my theory on the Backrooms being sentient here and trying to actually like trap Glenn to either play with / torment him is during the end of tape 1, Glenn mentions hearing birds, but he's not sure if he can actually hear them or not. And I even ponder during that section, do you think he can actually hear them, or is it in his head? Well, if you go just a little bit earlier before he mentions it, you can hear birds in the video, which leads me to believe he was actually hearing them. And I don't know, to me, that's most likely a sign that he was on the cusp of getting out. That may have actually been an exit, and the Backrooms was actively like stretching or distorting itself to keep him from getting away. Yeah, just a thing I noticed at the end here. I think if we're hearing the birds, they're probably not just in his head. Ooh, hello, here once again at the end of another one of these overly long deep dive videos. Once again, hearty thanks for making it. I actually quite enjoy making these, even though they're a lot more work than the other stuff. But yeah, no, I don't want to stretch this one out too much. Just want to say, if you guys like this type of video, let me know what other series you would like to see, especially if it's something I haven't heard of. Yeah, in order to make this not overly long, I'll call it there. Peace.